With the launch of the AMD Ryzen 9000 series CPUs, it only makes sense that we would also get brand new AM5 motherboards. This is E-Rock on Tech, and today we're taking a look at the Asus ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. Okay, yes, Asus did send this board out to me for a review. However, this is not a paid sponsorship, therefore all thoughts and opinions are my own. Now listen, I've been a long time ROG Strix customer. I have purchased many boards with my own money well before I ever became a tech YouTuber, so I am used to working with these boards. I'm used to purchasing these boards, and now that I finally had one sent to me for review, it's almost like a dream come true, so I'll be totally upfront about that. With that being said though, this board is very expensive, but I gotta be honest with you, after purchasing about 4 or 5 ROG Strix boards over the years with my own money, hands down, yes, this is the most expensive one I've ever had, but it's also by far the best ROG Strix board I have ever used. The price may turn you off, or maybe you're not into ROG Strix boards, but let's figure out what this thing has to offer and we'll take it from there. AMD has launched their new chipsets, which means we now have X870 and X870E motherboards. And according to AMD's own website, we will eventually be getting B850 and B840 motherboards as well. Now, for the purposes of today's video, we will strictly be focusing on this Asus ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. I recently released a video that covers the Asus TUF Gaming X870 Plus Wi-Fi motherboard. It's a much cheaper option than this ROG Strix motherboard if you are looking for something a little bit more budget friendly. Now that video is already up on the channel, so feel free to go check it out if that interests you. Now let me go ahead and get this out the way. If you currently own an X670 or X670E motherboard, then chances are the new series of motherboards are not for you. You should not get rid of your X670E to go get an X870E. Yes, there are some upgrades there, but not really worth the cost. I think the majority of people that would benefit the most from these boards are people coming into the AM5 platform for the first time. Now they'll have all these different models to choose from. They can get X670 or X670E, preferably for a discount, or they can go all in and get the latest and greatest feature sets available. So all in all, that will probably be the people who benefit the most from these new motherboards. Now, quickly, let's talk about AM5. As you know, I had a few issues with AM5 going back well over a year, and I did a 4-part video series on it, but I recently made an AM5 1 year later video. Spoiler alert, AM5 is good now. Everything's running rock solid. I have no RAM issues, no compatibility issues, no booting issues. Everything's good. I'm still getting comments where people are asking me, hey, is AM5 safe? Did you ever make an updated video? The answer is yes, I did make an updated video. It's on the channel. You can check it out. And yes, AM5 is safe. You can definitely upgrade now safely if you're interested in upgrading. Now, this is what you can expect from today's video. A brief overview on the X870 and X870E chipset, pricing for the Asus ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. I will unbox the motherboard for you. I will talk about all the specifications of the motherboard. I will also go over some software features like the UEFI Bios. I will share some thoughts and opinions along the way. And finally, you know I had to take this motherboard and put it into my main PC. And so I did a couple of upgrades, and well, we're pretty much right there at my dream PC, if you will. So I can't wait to show that to you towards the end of today's video. Now, per usual with my videos, I will have timestamps linked below for your convenience, so feel free to skip ahead to the part that's most interesting to you. But now let's talk about a brief overview of the X870 and X870E chipsets. Okay, the X870 and X870E chipsets have support for the AMD Ryzen 7000, 8000, and 9000 series CPUs, and any CPUs beyond that that will also be supported on the AM5 platform. Both X870 and X870E have support for PCIe 5.0 and Gen 5 M.2 NVMe SSDs. Both have support for overclocking for your Ryzen CPU. USB 4.0 support is now standard on all motherboards. Now, the main difference between X870 and X870E is the total usable lanes and overall port connectivity. And finally, X870E has 2 chipsets, whereas X870 only has 1. Therefore, X870E is the more feature-rich option comparison of the two options available. And now for the people who really want every little detail, here is the X870E block diagram. I will not be covering this. You are welcome to pause the video and zoom in or refer to my sources down below in the video description. Okay, now we need to talk about pricing, and like I've already mentioned, this is a very expensive motherboard. So brace yourself. The US MSRP of the Asus ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi motherboard is $499.99. Basically, this is a $500 motherboard. Look, I hear you, that is a lot of money. I already see the comments coming in now. $500, no wonder why it's your favorite AM5 motherboard. I hear you. Look, the most expensive motherboard that I have ever purchased with my own money at full retail was about $350, give or take. So this is definitely well above what I'm used to paying for a motherboard as well. But I will tell you this, after being able to use it and actually work with it and see how it differs from the boards behind me, I'm starting to fully understand why the price is what it is. This is truly an enthusiast level board. This is not an entry level board. This is not a budget friendly board. This isn't meant to be for a beginner building their first PC. This is for somebody who really knows what they want. Somebody who wants a lot of I/O, somebody who wants a lot of different connections and high speed connections. Again, just an enthusiast level board. And even then, it's not even the best that Asus offers, believe it or not. So they have a hero model that goes above this. Just keep in mind, this is an enthusiast level board. Let me start to walk you through some of the specs of the board, and then maybe you'll start to understand, okay, yeah, I can see why this is a little bit more expensive than something like the Tough Gaming, for example. Okay, so what do you get in a box? Well, obviously, you get the Asus ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. You get two 6 gigabit SATA cables, one thermal pad for an M.2 22110, one Wi-Fi Q antenna, one pack of cable ties, one M.2 Q-Latch package, two M.2 Q slides, one ROG keychain, one pack of ROG Strix stickers, 5 M.2 rubbers, and a quick start guide. And now I'm going to switch over and talk about the specifications and features of the motherboard. I will try to be as descriptive as I can, but if something is unclear, feel free to drop a comment below or check out the links in my video description taking you out to the webpage for this motherboard where you can see all the specifications for yourself. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out here is the illuminated RGB ROG Strix logo on the board. It definitely comes across as if it's pixelated, and so if you're into pixelated art or anything like that, then I think you're really gonna like the design here because it's definitely a little bit different, and I like it a lot personally. I think it looks really good in my build. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here is that I love GPUs and we love GPUs here on the channel. So let's talk about the main PCIe slot. This is a Gen 5 by 16 slot, and now it has the new generation of Asus's Q-Release technology. This is now Q-Release Slim. And what this means is that there is no physical button. Let me say that again. There is no physical button. So once you install the GPU, there is no button that you have to press in order to uninstall the GPU. What happens is if you pull from the back of the GPU, it will not move, it is locked in place. But once you try to pull from the front of the GPU, it just slides right out. Honestly, it's kind of trippy. I'm still getting used to it, but it definitely works for sure. I can't really see anything too bad about this technology. And if I don't have to push a button, I think that's great. And it honestly seems a little bit more intuitive. Buttons are kind of just there to serve as the go-between what we think versus what we want to happen. But this is a step forward to, oh, I just want to pull this out. Oh, I just want to push it in. And there's no in-between mechanism. And I like that a lot. So this is a really cool feature. It's still kind of tripping me out, but it is honestly a very cool feature. Okay, first of all, let me talk about the RAM or the memory compatibility. So we have 4 DIMMs here with a capacity up to 192 gigabytes of DDR5. The total speed supported here is 8,000 plus MTs, but you will obviously need to be in Gear 2 for this to work. And for those of you who may not know what Gear 2 looks like, here I am in the BIOS. And by default, this setting right here is on auto, which defaults to Gear 1. And Gear 1 actually looks like this option right here. And Gear 2 looks like this option right here. Now, it is also important to understand that memory speed is always subject to not just the motherboard, but also the quality of your RAM and your CPU's memory memory controller. Additionally, the Asus ROG Strix X870E-E gaming Wi-Fi motherboard has support for AMD extended profiles for overclocking, which we just call AMD Expo, and Asus is also offering their AEMP technology, which is called Asus Extended Memory Profiles. Here's how it works. If you happen to buy a DDR5 memory kit that has no overclocking profiles on it whatsoever, then you simply enable AEMP and the system will auto overclock your memory for you. Obviously, as with all overclocking technologies out there on the market, it will never absolutely push your hardware to the brink or the maximum that it could do. So if you're willing to put the time in, you could probably fine tune it a little bit more on your own. But if you're somebody like me and you're a little bit on the lazier side these days, hey, push of a button, extra performance, that's not bad, right? Next up, there's a cool new feature on this motherboard and only one other motherboard called the Hero motherboard, which is the board above this one, and it is Asus's NITROPATH DRAM technology. Essentially, Asus is claiming that this increases the slot retention force by 57%, featuring 39% shorter gold finger pins. And basically what that means is that you will have less noise interference into your DDR5 signal, therefore ideally offering higher RAM scalability, meaning you can push your DDR5 speeds even higher. Now, I got some thoughts about this, okay? So the NITROPATH technology sounds awesome, and I really want to be able to play with it and push it and see what I can do with it. But here's the problem. So this motherboard is claiming to reach over 8,000 MTs, and the last motherboard that I just got finished reviewing, the Tough Gaming Plus Wi-Fi motherboard, is also claiming to reach over 8,000 MTs. And so I think the way this would work is that in an ideal situation with all variables being exactly the same, except for the motherboards, then I think what this is claiming is that with the NITROPATH technology, you would be able to clock a little bit higher than you could clock with the non-NITROPATH technology. Asus is claiming that with the NITROPATH technology, they're seeing about a delta of around 400 MTs, meaning that with NITROPATH, they're clocking 400 MTs higher than non-NITROPATH. And eventually, I want to be able to get an 8,000 MT kit and test it out for myself, and that would make a pretty cool video, right? And maybe I'll get around to doing that. I just got to get a kit first. Next up, I want to talk about the Q-DIMM technology. And basically what this is that there is an LED light that will turn on and tell you there is a problem with your RAM if you have not properly installed it. And for those of you who may not know, you need to start with slots A2 and B2, and that is clearly labeled on the motherboard, so it's right there for you to see. But if you do try to install 2 sticks of RAM, and let's say for example you didn't push down all the way, then there is a light that will turn on telling you that your RAM is not properly installed. Now in my testing, I did discover that it is only checking for one bootable stick of RAM. What that means is that you can boot and post and all of that good stuff. You won't have any problems. But whenever you get into your Windows, if you're expecting to have 32 gigabytes of RAM, 16 might only show. If you're expecting to have 2 sticks showing up, maybe only 1 stick will show. And so you will still have to check in your software that both sticks of RAM are being registered. But from a hardware standpoint, if you start with 2 sticks of RAM and both are not properly seated, then there's a light there to catch you and let you know, hey, you made a mistake. And if you only start with 1 stick of RAM, if it's not properly seated, again, it will tell you there's a problem with your RAM install. I love this feature. I cannot speak highly enough of it, especially for first-time PC builders who are scared that they're pushing too hard on the DIMM slots and they don't want to break anything. This is a great tool to have. Every motherboard needs this feature, and I stand by that. I love this feature. I highly recommend it. So good job, Asus, on this feature. I do wish that it checked for 2 sticks of RAM though, and not just 1, but I totally understand why it's only checking for 1, because hey, technically you can boot, technically you can post, so I get it. Next up, this motherboard has super thick VRMs and fairly beefy heat sinks. I'm very impressed with how thick these heat sinks are. In terms of power stages, it is 18 plus 2 plus 2. It has an 8-layer PCB with 2 ounces of copper. It also has 5 total M.2 slots, 4 SATA 6 gigabit ports. 3 of those M.2 slots support Gen 5 NVMe SSDs. All of the M.2 slots do have heat sinks, and 3 of those M.2 slots have dual-sided contact, which means you have thermal pads above and below the M.2. All of the M.2 slots support Asus's Q-Latch feature. All you have to do is push down on the latch, insert your SSD, and now your SSD is locked into place. You do not have to screw anything in. One of these M.2 ports support an easy release mechanism. You literally push a button and the entire heatsink comes up, and then you just snap it back into place. This is a very cool feature. and one of these M.2s are already set up out of the box to support the Q-Slide feature, which basically allows you to have multiple different sizes of SSDs in that one slot. All you have to do is move the slider back and forth to fit the size of your SSD. Next up, this motherboard also features a physical start button, so you just push the start. Right below that, you're going to see a flex key button, which can be programmed in the BIOS to either reset the PC, enable or disable the aura lighting, or boot directly to the BIOS. So there are a bunch of different options here for that one little button. Right above the start button, you'll notice that we also have our standard Q LED debugging lights, but we also have a Q code readout display, which is always nice to have. There on the bottom of the board, we have an alteration mode switch, which is a physical button on the motherboard that can be programmed in the BIOS to either change the PCIe link speed or to change a fan profile. Additionally, this motherboard features Wi-Fi 7 with Q antenna, and what makes Q antenna so awesome is the fact that you can quickly just connect your antenna and then quickly disconnect it. It is truly a plug and play solution here. It's also interesting to note the Q antenna ports here are gold plated. Additionally, this motherboard does support Bluetooth 5.4. At the bottom, there are not one, not two, but three USB 2.0 headers. So even if you're running multiple RGB controllers, you will be covered. Also, this board does feature a microcontroller for additional CPU logging, and I will go over that in greater detail a little bit later on in this video. Next up, I want to point out the fact that this board does support ProCool power connectors with a solid pin design. The pins are thicker for the CPU power connector and a 24-pin power connector, and a metal shield surrounds the connectors, therefore providing a little bit more protection. But the best part is there is also an LED indicator by the CPU connectors. So very similarly to the Q-DIMM feature for the RAM slots, this is an LED light that will visually confirm if your CPU power cables are plugged in properly. Now let's take a look at the I/O on the motherboard. So there is an integrated I/O shield. There is a total of 13 USB ports. Nothing here is slower than 10 gigabit. There are two 40 gigabit USB-C ports, one 20 gigabit USB-C port with up to 30 watt fast charging, one 10 gigabit USB-C port, 9 10 gigabit USB ports, one 5 gigabit Ethernet port with ESD protections, which Asus is calling LAN guard. This absorbs electrostatic discharge. The audio jacks here are also gold plated, just like the Wi-Fi 7 antenna connectors. There is one optical S/PDIF out port, one clear CMOS button, one BIOS flashback button, which allows you to update your BIOS without a CPU or memory installed, and one HDMI port. I think that about covers it on the hardware side of things. So now let's start talking software. Over in the UEFI Bios, the BIOS is now in full HD resolution, so that is definitely nice to see. Additionally, Asus has this new feature called Q-Dashboard. This is a visual representation of your motherboard with basically every possible connection point visually represented. And some of these connection points you can click on, and then it will take you to that setting within the BIOS. Unfortunately, this does not work for every single connection point, like the RAM, for example, but it does work for the majority of the connection points. So it's an easy way to click on something and quickly go there and change that setting. Additionally, you can filter down to what you want to see. So if you only want to see your USB ports, you can do that. If you only want to see your fan headers, you can also do that as well. Now, it's important to understand that at the time of filming, Q-Dashboard is an exclusive feature to the current new motherboards for Asus. So the X870 and X870E motherboards. Asus has not yet confirmed if they will ever roll Q-Dashboard out to older models. I assume they probably will, but yeah, for now, that is an exclusive feature. Now moving on and talking about Driverhub. So now whenever you purchase a new Asus motherboard, as soon as you install Windows and load in, by default, you will be prompted to install an application called Driverhub. Now, when you install this application, it's basically just a web page, and from there, it scans your system, and that will provide you all of your drivers. So now you don't have to work with Armory Crate, and you don't have to go to Asus's website directly and find your specific model and start downloading everything. This app automatically just scans your system and says, here's your LAN driver, here's your Wi-Fi driver, here's your Bluetooth driver. In Driverhub, not only can you see pending updates, but you can also see previous things that you have installed on your system. You can also see your system information pertaining to your hardware, and not to mention there are some tools there that are optional that you can install. Personally, I love Driverhub. I think it's faster than Armory Crate or going to the website and manually downloading your drivers that way. Also, I think it's cleaner. For me, I like Driverhub. That's a good addition. Okay, a couple of more points and then we will start to close this out because I know the video is starting to get a little bit long. Do you remember that microcontroller controller I talked about earlier in the video, here's what that controller does for you. There is now a section in the BIOS called processor utilization. This section now shows you aggregate data on your CPU. So now you can see total uptime, you can see accumulated voltage and current and temperature and energy. Additionally, you can see your average voltage, your average current, and your average temperature. Now, this is a benefit for two reasons that I'm aware of. The first reason is that Asus will leverage this information to better enhance their AiOC. So if you utilize AiOC to overclock your CPU, that algorithm will now have better, more accurate information on your CPU. Secondly, you can look at this information over time to see, okay, is there any type of CPU degradation? Are my temps getting worse? Are they getting better? Am I drawing more current? Am I drawing more voltage? And now you can have a better understanding of what your system is actually doing over time. Okay, so I mentioned AiOC. Now let's talk about it a little bit more. So AiOC is Asus's automatic overclocking algorithm that will be applied to your CPU. Basically, it looks at your CPU score or your overall CPU quality. It looks at your cooler quality or your cooler score that is assigned to it by the system. And then it takes into consideration your motherboard quality, things like heat sinks and VRMs and just overall motherboard capabilities. And from there, it produces an algorithm and says, hey, we think we can safely overclock this CPU to X amount or whatever. And here's an example of that. So here is me playing Spider-Man Remastered, and this is just normal stock, out of the box, default settings. And you can see we peak at 5500 megahertz, but we never go over it. And in fact, most of the time we are actually somewhere below that in our gameplay. And now after enabling AiOC, you can see that we are now above 5500 megahertz more often than not. So that is a little bit of an overclock there. Now, again, it's not some type of radical performance improvement or anything like that, but it is more performance, and it was all at the push of a button. So again, going back to what I said earlier, if you don't really want to overly fine tune your system, but you do want to get a little bit more out of it, this is one of those features where you click a button and it overclocks it for you. And you can do this either through Armory Crate, or you can do it within the BIOS. Now, something to keep in mind is that if you have an X3D CPU, AiOC unfortunately does not work on that. But speaking of X3D CPUs, this motherboard does have predefined X3D profiles within the BIOS. And so you can say, hey, load predefined X3D overclocking profile. And from there, it will assign an algorithm and overclock your X3D CPU. Now, another thing that's pretty cool here is that with this motherboard, you do have access to an E-clock, which stands for an external clock. And then it gives you the option to go into an asynchronous mode, and Scatterbencher has an entire guide on this. But essentially, this is how you can truly increase the clock speed of an X3D CPU. And you can do this manually, or Asus has taken the liberty of setting up an X3D profile for you. And whenever you load that X3D profile that I just talked about, you can see clearly what it's doing. It's leveraging that E-clock and that asynchronous mode in order to increase your overall clock speed on an X3D CPU. That's just an overview. That's just a highlight. This isn't a deep dive. I'm just letting you know the feature exists. If you're interested, the research is out there. And this is something called Core Flex. Basically, Core Flex will take in 3 different data points, which are temperature, current, and voltage, to create a performance algorithm. You can set breakpoints to gradually reduce CPU core frequency as temperature or current increases. I have not really overly played around with this, but basically, it is a more granular way of really fine-tuning your CPU. Another thing you could play with too here is Dynamic OC, and it's basically what it sounds like. So you can overclock your CPU, or you can set up overclocking profiles for your CPU, and you can say, if I'm doing a heavy workload, I want you to use my multi-threaded overclock. But if I'm using a gaming workload, for example, then I want to use my single-threaded overclock. And the system will automatically determine based on some type of parameter that you set, okay, hey, we're doing multi-threaded workload now. Okay, hey, we're doing single-threaded workload now. And then the overclock will switch between the 2 different profiles. And that can be set up automatically within the BIOS as well. Now, you will still have access to the curve optimizer that's been there basically basically for many years now for AMD CPUs. But now with this generation of AMD CPUs, you now have access to something called Curve Shaper. This is brand new for this generation. Now, Curve Shaper will give you 15 additional tunable points. This includes 5 regions and 3 different temperatures. Curve Shaper is basically a much more granular curve optimizer. Additionally, it can stack on top of Curve Optimizer. This gives you more influence over your CPU's performance. If you want more information about how Curve Shaper works, then I would recommend a video by Scatterbencher. I'll have it linked below in my video description. Curve Shaper is something that's, again, brand new and very complex. As you can see, you can use it independently of Curve Optimizer, or you can use it on top of Curve Optimizer. And that does seem to be the best way of handling it, is by mixing the 2 different technologies. But really, this means you're going to have to spend a lot of time with your CPU going through each individual core and figuring out which configuration works best for each one of your cores. So it depends on how much time you want to put into it, but you can now tune your CPU better than ever before if you want to invest the time. Okay, and what about good old PBO, Precision Boost Overdrive? Well, now there are profiles for that too on this motherboard. You now have 3 different options to choose from. You can do a level 1, which targets 90C, a level 2, which targets 80C, or a level 3, which targets 70C. Level 3 will give you the least improvement in terms of performance, and level 1 will definitely be pushing your temperatures. So level 2 is probably the ideal recommendation here, but definitely play around with it yourself and let me know in the comment section below what you think. Okay, this video is getting way too long, so I'm gonna start to wind it down here. I didn't even cover AI networking or AI cooling. I did cover those topics in my previous video about the X870 Tough Gaming plus Wi-Fi motherboard, so you can check that out if you're interested. With all that being said, I also said I would show you what my PC build looks like now, so here you go. This is what it looks like. I took this motherboard and I put it in my main PC, and as you can see, it looks absolutely fantastic. I love the way this motherboard looks. This motherboard is an enthusiast level board. I am a high-end PC builder, and so I have an NVIDIA RTX 4090 in here. I have an AMD Ryzen 7800 X3D in here. I will be upgrading this to the AMD Ryzen 9800 X3D as soon as that comes out. I have a DDR5 memory kit in here that is only rated to run at 6000 MTs, yet I was able to overclock it to 6200 MTs. Unfortunately, I can't get it to go any further than that, but still that's higher than what the actual rated speed is, and I don't know if that's due to NITROPATH or not, but either way, I definitely want to look into getting an 8000 MT kit like I mentioned before, so that I can play around with that. Also, I have 3 Gen 4 M.2s in here, and now that I know this motherboard can support 3 Gen 5 M.2s in here, I may look to upgrade to at least 1 Gen 5 SSD, and it has a total of 5 M.2 slots in total, so maybe I'll add in at least 1 more M.2 there. So it is incredibly awesome with just all the different ports and connections that this motherboard has to offer. I am a gamer, I am a content creator, I do need a lot of ports. I can't tell you how many times I have built a PC and I have ran out of RGB headers or USB 2.0 headers, and I had to go buy a splitter or something like that. But with this, I don't ever foresee myself needing 3 USB 2.0 headers. And if I do, well, this motherboard covers it. And so going back to what I said way earlier in this video, this motherboard has everything I need and more. I don't see myself needing a new motherboard, anything short of just a whole new platform upgrade like AM5 to AM6, simply because the new CPUs won't be supported on this platform. But until that day comes, and whenever that day comes, I think I'm going to be covered here. This motherboard definitely seems to have pretty much everything. Now, with that being said, again, it's a very expensive board. I will say this, if I was in the market for a brand new motherboard, this would be the motherboard that I would want in terms of overall feature set. I don't even think I would want the Hero. I would want the Asus ROG Strix X870E-E for sure. But I don't know if I would pay for it without being able to play with it. I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I would. But now, after having it and after playing with it and being able to use it for a week or so and actually doing an entire PC build with it, absolutely. If this board was stolen from me or if it was taken away or something tomorrow, I would go back out and buy this board. That is how much I like this board personally. I wasn't paid to say that. That is my honest thoughts and opinions, but you can criticize me in the comments all you want. But look, let me level with you here. I'm exhausted. I have been filming nonstop for the last 15 or 16 hours. I filmed the last video, the Asus Tough Gaming video, and this video back to back, pretty much bouncing back and forth between the two, point for point, because I want to try to get both videos out at the same time. I'm a one-man team over here. I don't even have an editor yet, and I'm exhausted. And so I'm going to go get some sleep. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know this in the comment section below if you actually made it this far. If I do motherboard videos in the future, do you want them like this, where it's like a super technical deep dive? It has this feature, it has this feature, it has this feature. Or do you want more of a, hey, here's a quick 5 to 6 minute motherboard overview. This is what it looks like. Here's a couple of connections. Okay, bye, see you. Let me know in the comment section below what you're more interested in there, because this was a ton of work. And I really hope people appreciate it because I'm exhausted. If you did appreciate it, do me a favor, hit the like button, get subscribed, drop a positive comment, and maybe check out the Patreon. All right, until next time, E-Rock out.